everybody. Hello. Welcome back to another CodeNoobs weekly live stream, although it has not been weekly.
Well, wait.
Semi-weekly?
Semi-weekly. Yeah, we took like two weeks off. We were traveling, we had stuff going on, so
Stuff happens.
Yeah.
We're allowed to take breaks.
But we're glad to have you back here. And to commemorate our 420 subscribers that we have, if you didn't notice by the glasses, today...
Smoke them if you got them.
No, today...
Today Russell's eyes are really red.
Yeah, no. We're doing an episode all about vibe coding because who wants to actually code anymore, right? Like, what?
Crazy people?
Come on. Like, who actually wants to do that? Yeah. We can just wear glasses, listen to chill music, and tell AI to do all the heavy lifting, do all the work. So, but I know because
we are at a point, though, where it's gotten better now, too, where you can do it. Like, you couldn't before. Like, you just couldn't. Like, the AI was not good enough, And I think now it's finally gotten to the point where it's actually doable.
Oh, it's totally doable, yeah. Yeah, I mean, we're at a point where you can pretty much just be like a product manager and watch as the AI does all the heavy work. But I will say this. I think all of us have, been experimenting with vibe coding over the past, I don't know, couple of months at this point with mixed results, right? There's, you can have pretty good results with just like sort of one shot, like, hey, build me a to-do list app. And it'll do pretty good, but when you get a little bit more complex than the most simple apps that are ever made, there's like already
or like a one-page website or something, Yeah.
Right, and even with that,
I mean, snake game.
Yeah, like a snake game. You run into some issues. So today our episode is all about how to improve your experience with vibe coding, and I'm going to at least speak mostly about using Cursor, but I know Danny's been
using Bolt recently,
for a little bit.
So I can speak on that too. I will say I was going to mention too. It's funny because it is funny that when you talk about generating like content, like images and stuff. Yeah. People always talk about the importance of like iterating, right, to get what you want.
Yeah.
But then when they talk about coding, nobody talks about iterate. They just act like it should be like perfect.
It just feels like too much work, Like when you're coding and you have to type a little bit, and
I gotta sit here and type out sentences. It's insane.
Yeah. So I made a big list of different things, and I'll go through many of them. And I guess like if you guys want to comment on your experience with these. We can do it that way, and if you have other ones that I missed, certainly let me know. So the first thing that I think most people miss is that they just go straight into coding, right? They open up Cursor and they're like, I want to build this app, and they just start prompting the agent to start building. And I think that's probably the biggest oversight that most people have. I myself did that many times in the beginning.
But I think we all did, right? Where you go in and you're like, build me this.
Yeah.
And like without any kind of thought or any kind of planning, no kind of idea of what's going on. You just assume that it's going to kind of make, do everything right, organize a project correctly, all that stuff.
Yeah, exactly. And so one of the things that I've noticed over the past few months is that if you actually plan out your project, you're going to get a lot better results. And there's different ways to do that. You can use like the software development lifecycle idea to plan your project and build like a PRD and build mission statement, user stories. I think that's really good. And the more that you can actually build out a document that has a lot of information about what you want to build in it, the better success you're going to have. And a little tip that I have is I noticed this was really good on the last project that I have been building, is to start with your target avatar. And by that, I mean, who is the target customer, right? We so often make software and we're like, hey,
somebody will find it.
Yeah. Well, I mean, also like, let me just build a to-do list app, but we're not targeting like who is the end user of this, right? To-do list for what, right? Who's that person that's going to use it? Because you build things for everyone and you're essentially building them for no one. So it's really good to identify who is that avatar, right? Like who's going to use your app. Do you guys agree
It's
with
a good
that?
point.
No.
It's not like Field of Dreams. It's not like if you build
Yeah.
it, they will come.
Yeah.
You need to.
Because there's a million of them. So you got to like figure
No,
out.
I think that is a good point because like, I think that's also one of the roadblocks I think a lot of people have is like, well, that thing exists. It's like, yeah, but does it for that market?
Yeah.
Because we all have this experience, right, with like software, especially like stuff that is trying to be for everybody ends up being so complicated you can't use it. So
Yeah.
like finding that audience is really important, I think. And
Yeah.
I think to your point about planning is like it makes such a world of difference when you know where you're going. Because
Absolutely.
it's like it's the same as if you're going to code it yourself, right? You need to know what's next step, and you can use AI for that too. Like I like doing that myself, like especially when I'm working alone, where I don't need like by myself, I don't necessarily need like a full like detailed everything written out. I'll
Yeah.
get a quick like a quick PRD of like basic requirements. Then I'll go through and edit it and write my
Yeah.
own to-do notes, and then just follow those and knock everything out, right? And then you
Yeah.
naturally break it up into small segments, which makes the actual vibe coding easier.
Yeah, definitely. I noticed something interesting too about building this avatar was this, right? So if you think about large language models, they're trained on just a wide variety of information. So when you give it a generalized prompt, it sort of doesn't know where to go in its knowledge bank to find that information. I know I'm like oversimplifying how AI works right now, but it just sort of gives you a generalized answer or makes assumptions about your answer. But I noticed that by giving it an avatar, it actually built better content into things like the landing page and like the sales content from the beginning. So like, for example, I have been working on this application called RenewPick, and it basically just takes a photo, like an old photo, and restores it. And I built out the avatar, like the target avatar, before starting to build the app. And I, decided I was going to target people who are like 50 and older because those were people who probably had old pictures that they wanted renewed. And so what's interesting is when I actually went and prompted Cursor, it automatically added targeting in, and like the testimonials that it created were all people who are 50 and older. It used language that they were comfortable with and like knew, right? So understanding who your avatar is will actually just provide that little bit more of context for your AI models to understand, like, who should I be targeting? How should I make this look? I mean, even just the style of the website is more targeted towards that older generation. It's like white mode instead of dark mode, right? Which is totally
funny.
like that,
Yeah, I used
And the font is really big.
It is, dude. Like for real, it literally did that.
Yeah, it makes sense though. Yeah, because I mean that makes sense.
All the
though, right?
buttons are like half the page.
Yeah, it's just huge.
Yeah.
The click here. Yeah, I
Or
did that
go to
with the
jail.
when I did the started the project with Bolt. I was using Reddit stuff to get ideas.
Yeah.
And then so I included some of that into the initial prompt, and it did a good job with the design and keeping it kind of in line with that, which I think that's a good idea, is having some idea of who you're targeting makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
Especially because it is going to make assumptions about design, right? And
yeah, exactly. And it just helps it, as much context as you can give it, the better results you're going to get out of it, right? If you just ask for something general, you're going to get some really generic, usually not great functioning application. Whereas if you're,
I'd like to speak to that a little bit because I think a lot of people expect AI to be a miracle worker or a genie or something like that.
Yeah.
And it's very, very good. But if you understand how it works, it can be a little bit better because while it was trained on all of essentially the whole internet, everything that's out there on the internet, it's kind of like a foggy old memory. So it's somewhat like if you saw a movie 10 years ago and I was asking you about the movie, and it's not your favorite movie or something, it's just a movie you saw 10 years ago.
Yeah.
You wouldn't really know that much information about it. You might kind of get the general concept, but if I asked you about characters or different things that happened, you'd be like, I don't really remember. But then if you refresh, if you watch the movie again yesterday and I ask you today, you're going to know a lot better. And so that's what adding context to AI essentially does. Because while it was trained on all of the internet and while it has a foggy memory of everything out there, if you give it something that's practical, useful for exactly what you're doing, and specifically you give it a longer prompt with more details, you're going to get a much, much better result out of it.
Actually,
Yeah,
yeah, I
it's
think
a
no, that's a
great
good
point.
point. It's a good example. I like that analogy too. It's a good one. The Yeah, I think too, one of the things that I think can help a lot of people is going on to the documentation and reading about like their suggestions for prompting.
That
Like, so
was
go
my
to the
next
go to the
bullet
API
point.
docs. If you
Yeah.
go to the API documentation, they'll give you lots of recommendations for prompting, and you can apply that to when you're using it client side, right? And it
Yeah.
works so much better
You're
because
speaking specifically about like for large language models, right? So like
yeah, yeah.
ChatGPT has
ChatGPT, Gemini,
documentation.
any of
Yeah.
these, Claude, you go to their website, look at the API docs for developers, and they'll have tons of information about how to structure your prompt,
Yeah.
what you can do, what it's good at.
Yes, Randall.
Go ahead.
It's also really helpful to have the AI write the prompts for you.
Yes.
Yes.
So many times I have AI write prompts for me to use in different things. Like if I'm doing deep research, if I'm doing a picture on Midjourney or something like that, I'll have ChatGPT write me a prompt for it to get the things that I actually want.
Yeah. I
I
heard
do it all
this.
the time for projects now too. When you want a prompt, when you're integrating AI, I'm like, make me a
Yeah.
template for this, and then you edit it, and you
Yeah.
get a great starting point. Yeah.
I heard this new term recently. It's called prompt folding. And not the one that you're thinking of, Randall. It's called prompt folding. And basically, it just talks about iterating with AI. So basically, you give it a prompt, and then you ask it how to improve your prompt to get a better result. Because AI sort of has this knowledge of itself of how it works. So it can actually create better prompts for you if you just ask it, like, hey, how can I improve this prompt? What other information would be helpful to understand to get a better result out of this prompt? And you can do that a couple times and get, much better results from it.
I think that's the other thing too, because we're all freaking so impatient now. And
Yes.
all of this requires iteration.
Yes.
Not just accepting the first thing, but doing it multiple times to get to exactly what you want. Because it will get there. That's the impressive thing, is it has gotten very good, but you do need to like keep working with it to keep refining it to get to that like exact thing that you want. And I think
Yeah.
that's
It's
where
like
so many
prompt
people fail because
inception.
Yeah. Prompt inception. Speaking of, being impatient, one of the other things that I wrote read the docs, but what I meant was a little bit different than what you were saying. So you were saying like read the large language model docs, which I think is very important because they explain to you how to prompt engineer. But if you're going to be using Cursor or Bolt or any of these other like
Oh yeah,
V0, Lovable,
Yes.
any of these other things, read their docs because they tell you how to use them, right? You go
Not
into
to that, yeah, and
Cursor.
also the settings. They also explain the
Yes.
settings, which is like there's a lot of options in their settings and
There's a
stuff that are
lot of options.
confusing. And like
Yes.
I know when I first used it, I was like, I don't even know what all this stuff is.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
yeah.
And we got, to where we are through experimentation. I'm constantly trying to use new things. But here's like a couple, if you are using Cursor, here's a couple things that I've found super helpful. So number one is understand that there's really 3 different ways to use the AI in Cursor. There's tab completion, which is basically like you're in a file and you're typing and you can, it'll guess what you want it to do, sort of like GitHub Copilot, and you can tab through.
Super awesome too. It makes it a lot
it
faster.
works really, really well.
Yeah.
The other one is inline, so you can basically highlight some text and do Control K, and it will take that text, and then you can prompt it directly into a little box that appears, and it'll just edit that bit of code. You can also do that for like the entire file. I believe it's like Control L. And then the last one is you have your chat, which is like to the side, right? And that's for big things like, hey, like, build out a whole Next.js project, like folder, or doing like larger chunks. And that's really beneficial. But with chat, you just want to give it as much context as possible so that it understands what it should do and what it shouldn't do. Because sometimes, for good or bad, Cursor can just like go for it. Like there are times where I'm like, hey, I just want to do this. And it'll just be like prompt after, it'll just start building. And it's crazy. It works really well sometimes, but then
I find when it does that, though, it goes in directions you don't necessarily want to go in,
exactly.
And especially when you have a plan like back end and stuff like that, like it can go in directions that aren't going to work well for what you have in mind. That's the other thing too, though, I think is like when we talk about, using context and adding good context, actually, using the @ symbol for files and stuff to
That
make
was
sure
my
that like
next one. Yeah.
you're targeting specific files. That's going to be in the context, so it knows
Yeah.
specifically what you're working in, right? And you can do that too, even like if you're not using Cursor, but you're using like Claude, like on the browser, right? You can upload files. You can upload your code. So
Yep.
I do that all the time just to get better results, because then it knows actually like what your project looks like, what these documents look like, the logical flow of the code, like what's going
Yes.
on, and it can make a lot better suggestions for you.
Yeah. And Cursor has gotten much more advanced with, they call it like symbols, or it's sort of like a tag. You use the @ symbol, and then you can use like a word after that. And there's different ones. Again, this is why I recommend reading the documentation. The most common ones are you can @ and tag individual files or folders. So a lot of times I'll do something like, you know, in this file at whatever the file name is, you know, change the corner roundness of whatever, or something like that, right? So that you're literally telling it, this is the file I want you to work inside of, and it understands, okay, this is what I'm doing, and then it gets more context of like what other files might be related to that and so forth. But there's a lot of them.
Real quick, just to what you were saying though, is like I've been doing that too recently. Like when I want to, if I'm making like a new page, like a whole new route page, I'll add one that already exists and be like, keep the styling like this. That way it doesn't just, because usually it gets it pretty close anyway, but just to make sure so you don't have to go back through and like, you know, look for all that little stuff.
So there's like, this is kind of cool. If you read the documentation, they have all these different ones now, and I'm going to read them off. But one of the ones that I was just looking at is what you're talking about. You can reference code snippets. So you can do like @ code and get just a snippet. So you can be like, duplicate this code, right? Or use this like pattern.
And you can do like lines, like it'll be like 56 to whatever, or something like that, right?
Yeah, and that you can highlight. That's one of the other things that's kind of cool with the inline. So you can highlight some lines of code, and it'll pop up this chat window. And you can write a prompt directly into that, or you can say send to chat, and it'll pull those lines into the chat window, and then you can do more with it there. So you can like add more context or whatever. But these are all the different ones you can do.
Anthony likes your shades, by the way.
Who does?
Anthony likes your.
Hey, thanks, buddy. I got these at React Miami, so if you want them, you got to show up. They're actual Vercel shades.
Branded shades.
Yeah, they're direct from Vercel. So thank
you. What's up, Sly's Analog and Digital Chronicles?
What's up, Sly? You're not the only one watching, but a lot of people do watch this after the fact because also we've taken 2 weeks off, so fair enough.
Understandable.
Yeah. So here's just like a bunch of the different symbols that you can use, or the different tags you can use. You can tag individual files, folders, code, docs. So if you like, you can literally say, hey, I want to use like Next.js, Next 15 docs. Git, so you can like target Git related symbols, right? So like a specific branch or commit. You can target the web. You can drop in a URL and it'll search that URL.
Which is awesome. Yeah, I use that a lot for documentation that's not in there already.
Yeah, definitions, links, lint errors, recent changes. So you can like look up recent changes in your chat, which is kind of cool. Cursor rules, which I'm going to talk about in a second here. Notepads, which is an interesting one. This one's sort of like in beta, but you can have you can literally create notepads and then reference those and pass chats. So there's quite a bit.
It's really cool, and really, I mean, it improves the results, like, I mean, exponentially when you use these, I think, and use them well. Yeah. And a lot of it is just experimentation too, and figuring out what works for what you're doing. You know, I mean, totally. It's so quick too. Like, it makes sense to try different stuff because why not? It only takes a minute.
Some of the other ones here are indexing your code base. So this happens sort of automatically. If you look inside the Cursor rules, it will automatically index your code base from time to time, meaning it's going to sort of like reference everything in your code base. And from my understanding, make like embeddings on that so that it understands what's going on a little bit better. But if you notice that, you know, the chat is sort of like, I've noticed this a couple times where I'm like, hey, why is the chat like adding files that already exist, or like playing around with things like that, it doesn't make sense. Usually it's because your code base hasn't been indexed in a little bit. And so you can actually go into the settings and just click the refresh, and it'll index your code base again.
Do you when you're like using agent mode or chat or whatever,
yeah,
do you like start new ones fairly regularly?
Yes, that's a good point too.
Helpful too, because I think when you do it reindexes, it gives it a chance to reindex stuff.
Yes.
It also clears out context, so you're not referencing old things. Like,
yes,
because I know that's another problem where a lot of people just stay in one thing and keep working, and at a certain point, everything before it's forgotten.
Yeah, absolutely. I do that a lot of times when I'm going between sort of minor features. So I'm like working in one file, and then I'm like, okay, now I want to like, work on this bug or something that's unrelated. I'll start a new chat just so that it's sort of like a fresh context and it's not getting confused or mixed up with anything. Well,
so one of the things that helped me a lot with that was I was reading this article, this was a while ago, about agents and like designing agents. And one of the things they were talking about that's really important when you're doing that is how do you preserve context?
Yeah.
And like, because over time, they all have a limitation at some point, whether it's 100,000 tokens, a million, whatever, and you're going to hit that limitation. So there's various methods like summarization and stuff where they can keep the main ideas going.
Yeah.
But it's going to get worse over time. And so I think starting new ones regularly is a really good method for that. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. The other thing that you can do is index individual documentation. So if you want to be able to tag like the Next.js documents, you can index them. So you drop in basically the URL for the documentation, and Cursor will index them. So it has a better idea. Yeah, because remember that a lot of these models that you're going to be using, like Cursor uses, you can select which model you want to use, but they're only trained up to a certain date, right? So anything that's changed after that within the documentation, they're not going to have context stuff. And you can't really guarantee, even if they are trained up to a certain date, that they're going to understand that. So it's really important to, if you want Cursor to write code in a specific way, you really want it to tag those documentation so that it has a better understanding of what you want.
That's another good reason too to check out API docs for these large language models, because they'll give you the actual date of the cutoff date for when these things were trained.
Yeah.
And so like you can actually see, like, I think it's like GPT like 4.0, I think it's like cutoff date is like 4/8/24 or something, but then like 4.1's like last month. I mean, it's very interesting. So yeah, that can help a lot with it too.
Yeah. I got some more for you guys. Are you ready? You prepared? All right. So using Cursor rules. I think this is one of the coolest features of Cursor is that you can build Cursor rules documents that basically guide your AI on rules about things they can and cannot do, and design principles and architecture.
Be very helpful with like UI and stuff too, and keeping things consistent and stuff like that. Yeah.
Yeah, and what's really cool is I've been looking into this quite a bit because I'm working on building sort of like a Cursor assistant, and what's interesting about the Cursor rules, so they used to have just generalized like Cursor rules for like your entire like workspace, and now they've deprecated that and they're using project rules, which I think is better because it makes more sense, right? Every project's going to have different rules, but also what you can do is have different rules for different parts of your project as well. So you can make a Cursor rules file just for front end, one for just back end, or whatever part of the project you want, so that when it goes to like change UI, it uses those specific rules. Whereas if it's building an API, it's going to use a different set of rules. And that just allows you to preserve like a smaller context window and give it better
It speeds things up too, because if you work with a lot of the same technologies in a project and stuff, and because you can get the same results by writing good, careful prompts, but it just takes away that headache of having to enter that every time.
Yeah.
Too. Like, you kind of just makes your life easier.
Yeah, exactly. All right. This is what I'm going to share now is probably the best advice I can give you to like make, there's three pieces here that I'm going to give you that are going to make your Cursor coding way better than it ever has been before. Okay. So number one is creating a folder of development documents. And I sort of touched upon this before, but you want to create a couple documents. I typically use at least these three. Number one is a detailed PRD, which is a product requirements document. It basically says everything about what is the project that I'm building, who is it for, what is the mission statement, what are all the user stories, and can even go a little bit more in depth in terms of like my tech stack and my plan for building this.
You can even include like theme stuff, fonts,
Themes,
color
yeah.
palettes, everything. Yeah.
So, and that's sort of the second thing is I usually separate out a style guide, right? So that PRD, I do like a lot of like, what's the big idea of this app? And then I'll have another document that's a style guide. So it'll say like exactly what styles I want. And you can, again, use AI to build this. So you can drop into Cursor example photos and then say like, build a style guide based on this. And it'll build it.
Well, that's what's cool too. You can also link to websites now too and do it that way if you don't even drop in a photo.
Yeah.
But that's a good one too, because like keeping buttons at this specific border radius, stuff like that, that just makes your life way easier and it makes it look a lot more consistent and normalized over the site.
Yeah. And then the last thing is build a development checklist. And so that you can ask Cursor to literally task out every single thing in the app based on that PRD. So those three things are one piece of this. The second piece is the really important thing is to break things into chunks. Don't try to do like a whole landing page or break every single piece of your project down into like smaller chunks. The smaller you do, the better results you're going to get, right? And when you're building these things, reference those documents that I just talked about. So you're going to do like and you can put these all in a folder. That's what I typically do, like a dev folder or something similar. And Cursor allows you to tag an entire folder. So I'll say like, based on @development folder, build me the hero section for this website, right? And then whatever other context I can add, that'll be helpful.
And this is true. It's funny, but it's true for like whenever you use AI. But breaking things up, targeting small things, you get way better results, much more high quality. And you don't always have. It's funny because we were talking about this before, but like when we all first started using it, like you just type in something, you expect the whole thing to be made at once, and you get crappy results. And sometimes, like I know I mentioned to you guys using bulk a lot, like now because I've been using it this month for this hackathon thing. It does make a lot of assumptions, but I think its target audience is a little different than like Cursor and stuff, so you get different results from that. But it's gotten better. Yeah. But it does do a lot at once.
I thank you, Chris, for appreciating my glasses.
You have to have glasses on when you're vibe coding.
Chris is messaging me on the side too with his 15 monitors vibe coding all at once for him. I appreciate it, man. And you got to have these. Like, it's just essential. Otherwise, you're not really vibe coding. What else do I have here? Let's see. Oh, so going along with breaking things down is like, look at the code too. Like, don't just click accept all. I know it's super tempting, but at very, very least, scan to see like what it has done. What changes have been made. Don't just accept all of it.
Well, even if you're doing smaller pieces at a time, like I'll do accept all, then review it, because usually I'm doing like a file or a change at once, so it's easy to review. Yeah. But you have to review it because it makes mistakes, dude. The stuff still hallucinates. There's still going to be issues.
And that's a good point too. If you do click accept all and you see that there's an issue with it, you can restore to a checkpoint before in the chat if you're using chat. So that is a nice feature as well. One of the things that I always do too is I just have localhost running, obviously, so I can see when it makes a change in Cursor. Before you accept it, it will change the code, so you can see the change live in your localhost before you accept that change. So like a lot of times it's helpful because the code may seem fine, but then the functionality, especially when you get to like logic things, the functionality may not work. And a lot of times Cursor is not great at that because it can't have the context window of your entire code base. So you'll be like, hey, fix this thing is not working how it's supposed to, you'll ask it to fix it. And it's like, cool, found the problem. And you're like, nope, still there. Like,
yeah.
Still an issue. So yeah, and the last one, I'm just going to go through this last one because it's sort of like the meat and potatoes of this. I heard this one recently, and it's sort of like how I've been going through doing cursor projects anyway, but I think it's helpful to understand this. So instead of trying to just build everything at once, it's really helpful to build in stages. So building the front end using dummy data first, right? And that way you have everything looking how you want it to, and then you can understand what data you need and what data you don't. Then doing like the schemas, so understanding like what should be in the database, where I need functions to handle certain logic, and building the backend APIs. And then third, connecting everything, so connecting the front end to the back end so that now you're actually pulling real data from a database into the front end, and you can remove all the dummy data. And then finally polishing and refining everything, making sure that it works how it's supposed to and the flows work how they're supposed to.
No, it's funny. I was gonna say, yeah, every time I use it, like if I'm building a form, I tell it to make everything console log first. Yeah. Because you don't want to just immediately try to connect, because then if it makes a mistake, it messes everything up. I also want to mention too that all these like in-browser ones now, like Bolt, stuff like that, you can also do that where like if it makes a change that you don't like, you can revert back.
Yeah.
They allow you to do the same thing. So that's a really good feature because it makes it a lot easier. And you don't have to like, the other thing too is you can connect GitHub to all of these. You should.
Yes.
And whenever you're going to make a big change with a prompt, make a new branch.
Yeah.
Because that way too, you also can revert back to your previous branch that's still working if anything happens. And you're never in a position where like if the revert doesn't go back right or something, you still have your preserved code, so you're good.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a good point. You made me think of something, but then I forgot it. So
that's okay. But you should though. I mean, even if you're coding alone, like branches are super important. They make it so much easier to work. And I think I've been doing that now, like especially for this project because it's fairly large, and every new feature, I just make a new branch, and then you don't have to, you can make sure everything works right before you do anything else moving forward.
Yeah, I remembered what I was going to say. You made me think of this actually is, it's very tempting to build using like the latest, greatest tech stack in the world. And I actually had a conversation with somebody at a meetup this week where he knows PHP really well, and he does not know React or anything like that. And he was asking me, like, for a client, he's like, should I build it in PHP or should I build it in Next.js? And I'm like, that's a hard question because you just know PHP a lot better. Probably Next will be more performant, but if you don't understand it, you're going to struggle through that. And so I think it's important.
Also, the newer frameworks, it's going to be hard. You have to understand the framework because these models are not going to be trained up to the newest one. And a good example, I think I told you when I started the project on Volt, it chose like I had to upgrade
like
Next.
It
chose like Next 13 or something.
Oh my god!
So I had to upgrade it to 15 on my own. Which I did fine. But like if you don't understand how it works, upgrading can be a pain because that changes a lot. Instantly in your project.
Yeah, and so I think my point with that is this: is that ultimately the end user doesn't know what tech stack you used or if you're using the latest, greatest tech stack or how nerdy you are or how cool you are as a developer. They really just care about one thing, and that is, does it work? Does it do what it's supposed to do? And is it easy to use? So in the interest of appealing to getting customers and getting paid for your work, it's usually better to just use the tech stack that you know the best, right?
Even if you're building an MVP for something, you can, if it does really well, you can always change it later.
Exactly.
With a team of people, like you don't need to do it.
That's not to say like don't try new things with Cursor. That's one of the best parts of it is like you can learn new tech stacks pretty easily because you can ask it things too, right? There's an ask an agent mode. So you can understand these things better. I know Chris, who was watching, if he's not still on here, has been using Cursor to learn Next.js, and he's like pretty kick-ass at building Next.js websites in like a week, right? So you can do
it makes it so much easier to learn now with it,
but I would advise, if you're going to do something like an MVP or for a client or production, just use what you know so that you can actually look at the code and be like, yeah, that's working how it should.
We should also mention MCPs too, probably.
Yeah. So that was like the last section I had here, which is just like advanced features of Next.js that I recommend using once you get,
of Cursor.
Or yeah, sorry, not Next.js, of Cursor. Once you sort of get an understanding of how Cursor works, you've used it for a while, there's really 3 different things. One is MCP servers. So we're not going to go into that. We have like a whole other episode about MCP servers and what they are. So you can check that out if you want. But those can be super helpful if you're working with outside resources and you want to be able to sort of talk to those resources in plain English.
Especially if a model's not trained on it too. It can be very helpful.
Yeah. Another one is choosing different models. If you go into Cursor settings, you can choose, I think there's probably close to like 40 or 30 different models you can choose from now. And my recommendation is to use Claude 4. I've found that that's exceptionally good right now.
But what's funny though is they're all good at certain things. Like
yes.
I still think Gemini 2.5 Pro still beats Claude, especially on Google related stuff.
Yes.
And I think understanding that, like sometimes you might not get a good result from like one, but if you switch models, you get a much better result. So yeah, it's a super important point.
Yeah, absolutely. And also they all have different size context windows. So Claude 4 is great, but it has a very small context window. So if you're trying to feed a lot into your prompt, you might get better results with something like GPT 4.1, which I think
is like a million.
Yeah, like it has like a million token context window. So you might get better results with that. And then the other one, and this is for those wealthy developers in the group, is to use max mode. And basically what that does is it unlocks full context window, but you have to input, I don't think you have to input your own API keys, but
it'll blow through it goes through your fast chats faster. Yeah.
Yeah, and also you'll get charged extra. So like you can get a bill for like $200 extra.
Well, it uses API fees, so whatever the API cost is for it. And you can actually, what's nice now is when you select the model in agent mode, it tells you how many requests it costs out of your 5, whatever your designated limit is that month, and then so that can be helpful too for planning and stuff.
Yeah. So I mean, if you don't think we just shared a ton of gold about vibe coding, you are crazy, because that is probably, if you follow what you just heard in this episode, your
results will be so much better,
significantly better. So yeah, with that, thank you guys for tuning in. I don't know if you guys have anything else to share, but if you do want to be part of our inner circle, hang out with us every Saturday, even when we don't live stream, we hang out on Saturdays. You can do that. You just head over to CodeNoobs.io and sign up for our inner circle. We get a private Telegram chat for you where we answer your questions directly 24/7. And then, of course, every Saturday we meet for about 2 hours to discuss what we're working on, how to help you get a job, how to help you once you have a job to build projects that you're working on, how to handle work dynamic, all sorts of different things. Basically anything that you need support with, we are here to help you, along with a community of other developers. So if that's something you're interested in, you can start for free. Actually, we have a free trial for the Inner Circle. That's just the Telegram group. And then the Inner Circle Elite gets you access to the video chats. So if you're interested, you can join us there. And if not, you just keep hanging out with us on Saturdays, and we'll be here with our vibe coding glasses on and teaching you all sorts of cool stuff that we're learning and doing. Yeah. So thanks again for everybody tuning in. And if you are inside the inner circle, we'll see you in about 20 or so minutes. And true that, Charles, vibe coding gold here.
Heck yeah.
That's right. Always dropping the knowledge. Peace, guys. We really enjoy you watching, and we will see you next